So when we talk about taming the passions, perhaps the first thing we should do is talk about what we mean by that. What do we mean by taming the passions? So the passions are initiated by our senses, by the things that we see, by the things that we taste. And if we are to become truly free and learn to live by God's will, we need to control the passions that result from the way that we react to our senses. Now, we receive information from our senses. We receive data. We receive, when we eat something, we receive flavors. When we hear something, we receive sounds. We receive information. So we receive things by our senses, and then we react in some way because of what our senses have received. For example, you might crave certain foods, and then when you're deprived of them, you become disturbed and possibly even angry. This could happen during Lent. I'm not going to eat these foods during Lent. And then all of a sudden you find that you're getting grumpy and things like that. Or you're not going to use Facebook during Lent or something like that. And then you're anxious about it because you want to go and do those things. So what we need to do is gain control over the reactions that happen when our senses have to get information. We need to get freedom from the things we like and the things we don't like. And this is what we mean by taming the passions. Our senses receive information, our sight, our smell, our hearing, our taste, our feeling. We receive information, some of the things we like, some of the things we don't like, and then we react in a certain way. So we need to be able to not just react as if we had no control over the reactions. And that's what we mean by taming the passions. When you're able to do this, you gain the freedom to do God's will and to love others by being less focused on your own desires. This doesn't mean that you need to deprive yourself of good food or entertainment. Everything God has given us, everything God has created is good. But it does mean that we should enjoy what's necessary, but also not follow indulgences simply based on our desires for sensual pleasure. We can't just ignore the passions. If we ignore the passions, our desires can just take over. Now, right now, we generally don't follow our passions fully, or at least for most things. We know that we can't just drive as fast as we want when we're in the car. We limit ourselves because of certain controls. I mean, if we just felt we could do whatever we wanted to do, maybe we would race down the road, but we don't do that. We're not, and this is an example of not ignoring the passion, we're controlling it. So we need to think about that with other things too. We need to recognize what our passions are and then train them to come under the control of our soul and our mind. This is how we live in a way that doesn't undermine our health, our security, or freedom from sinful tendencies such as anger. With untrained passions, when we don't get our passions under control, it's like having a team of wild horses pulling your wagon. You think that you're the driver, but really it's the horses who are deciding where they want to go. The wild horses are like untamed passions. The challenge is to harness and train our passions so that they do what we want them to do, so that they follow our commands, just like a trained team of horses is obedient to the commands of the driver. So the task begins firstly with acknowledging that we are controlled by the things that we like and the things that we don't like. These things that we like, maybe it's food or people agreeing with us or people liking us, or the things that we don't like, people not liking us, certain political people. There's things we like and there's things we don't like, but we can't let this stuff control us. So we begin by learning to say no when we are being led to indulge in something that we know is not good for us. And this is one of the benefits of fasting that we're advised to do. By choosing not to eat certain foods, we are in effect training our mind to be more obedient. So when we fast, it's not about certain foods are bad or certain foods are evil. Like in the Jewish approach to food, where they have kosher foods, things they can eat and things that they can't eat. This is because they believe the things that they can't eat are just bad. One shouldn't eat them. They are unclean. For the Christian, we don't really have that. We believe that all things are good. At the same time, it's good to discipline ourselves with food, because if we can say no to certain foods, that will help us in the training of ourselves, getting the practice to train, to be able to say no to things so we can even say no to the passions. We want our hearts, even our desires, our likes and dislikes to become obedient to our soul. And that's when we get greater freedom. So fasting has always been one of the first disciplines in the church that was taught after prayer. Even from the very beginning, early period of the church, when someone was joining the church, they would teach them about prayer, and they would teach them about fasting, because fasting is one of the ways that we gain control over our passions. Again, we don't fast because certain foods are bad or meat is bad, because there's times of the year that we do eat meat, but it's learning how to say no. Even Jesus himself, the first thing he did after his baptism was to go into the desert and pray for 40 days. And he fasted for 40 days. He was both fully human and fully divine. He was also taming the human passions within him. So, as was discussed in an earlier class, the Orthodox way of life involves many fasting periods and fasting days. We have the Great Fast before Pascha. We fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. We fast before Holy Communion. We have a church calendar that also helps us know when the fasts are. On our screen here, I just put down a little diagram that we can look at. So we have the fast that occurs before Christmas. We have Great Lent, followed by Holy Week. So this kind of constitutes, we usually call this whole period Great Lent or the fast, but really it's two things. It's Great Lent and then Holy Week, but they all come together, so we look at it as one. And then we have the Apostles' Fast, and then we have the Dormition Fast at the beginning of August. Now, this one here, I just put it the way it is for this year. So this year, Lent starts in the middle of March and Pascha is May 2nd. So kind of the last day of fasting would be May 1st. But this area would shift back and forth depending on what year it is. And actually, this section here, it always ends on this date, but the beginning date is different depending on when Pascha is. So if Pascha is earlier, then this starts earlier. So the whole period might be a little longer or a little shorter, but it always ends on this day. And then, so we have these fasting seasons. We also have most Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year are fast days. We do have some Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year that aren't fasting days. For instance, if a great feast like Epiphany today falls on a Wednesday or a Friday, it's a non-fasting day. So today, even though it's Wednesday, it's also the Feast of Epiphany, so it's a fast-free day today. So we have fast-free days, a few of them, but we also have certain fasting days outside of it. So at the end of August, August 29, we have the remembrance of the beheading of John the Baptist. And so that's a fasting day. Also, over here, the day before Epiphany, which is the 5th, whatever day it falls on, if it's a Sunday or a Monday or whatever, it's a fast day. And also the Feast of the Cross, September 14, is a fast day. So we have these fasting days, a couple of them, 3 of them. We have most Wednesdays and Fridays, though not all. And we have these fasting seasons. So we would call fasting an ascetic discipline. It's not because God doesn't like those foods that we're fasting from them. It's to help discipline ourselves. Our souls need to be disciplined so that we can not let the passions just take over like wild horses and then drive us where we don't want to go. If we think about the reasons certain people get into trouble, oftentimes it's because their passions weren't tamed and they went into a direction, a place that they shouldn't have been going. And so the church teaches us to tame the passions and encourages us way beforehand, way before a person even has really passions. When we're children, we teach them about certain fasting principles and prayer. Even morning prayer and evening prayer is an ascetic discipline. Worshiping, going to church, it's an ascetic discipline. Reading the scriptures, these are all practices that we do to help train our souls so they don't become, so they're not wild. Now, I mentioned kind of this physical fasting. I'd like to also mention, although it's not the main focus right now in this talk, but spiritual fasting is also very important. St. Basil the Great said, true fasting lies in rejecting evil, holding one's tongue, suppressing one's hatred, and banishing one's lust, evil words, lying, and betrayal of vows. So fasting isn't something that just deals with food. Most of the time when we talk about fasting, we talk about food. But St. Basil is saying it's not only saying no to meat, but it's also rejecting evil, watching the things that we say, watching how our our anger and feelings of hatred towards another person, that's not a good thing. The lust that a person has, the words that we say, watching the words, controlling the words that come out of our mouth, lying. betraying promises that we've made to other people or to our spouse. And we read in the book of Isaiah, is this not the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? So we have to be careful not to make fasting an end in and of itself. It's not about fasting. We fast so we can help learn to control the passions within us. We don't fast so we can become the best fasters. So other people can say, oh, that person's really holy because they do all the fasts. It's not about anybody, what they think of us. Hopefully, people don't even know much about our fasting, but fasting is to control those passions. And again, those passions are the reactions that we have to the things that we like and the things that we don't like. So I just wanted to mention the spiritual fasting that kind of goes along with it. So oftentimes we find that we're stuck in a rut and we are so conditioned to a particular like or dislike that we can't bear even the thought of tearing ourselves free from it. It's like there's a deep groove engraved in our mind, like a rut that you can't get out of. We do the same thing over and over again without even thinking about it. So these ruts, these patterns need to be identified and eliminated, because when we're in one of those patterns like that and our mind isn't even thinking, we're not choosing about what we want to do, about what's right, what's not right. We're just being obedient to my likes and my dislikes. It's like we've become robots. We're programmed and we don't have choice anymore. And that's what happens with the passions. And when we look at the passions at an extreme, like if you think of addiction, for instance, addiction to drugs, for instance, the person has lost all sense of freedom. They even don't want to do the things they're doing, and they still do it anyway. And so this is an extreme of a passion, but we all do things, maybe not that extreme, but maybe it's just as bad in different ways. We want things a certain way, and if it doesn't happen, we get angry. Or this person says this thing to us, and automatically within us we get feelings of resentfulness. So we need to identify what those ruts are in our life. We all have different things that are that we just do over and over again. When we're stuck with following whatever our desires are, and they're kind of automatically stimulated by our senses, if our ear hears something, takes something in from another person, it triggers anger in you and you're headed for conflict. Think of like a light switch. If you flip the light switch, the light goes on. The light doesn't really have a choice. Once the switch is switched, it goes on. And sometimes we're like that. Someone will say a little something to us, and it's like the switch on the wall. Boom, they say that thing to us, and automatically I'm feeling all this resentment and anger. And so what's happened there is we have lost control of how my soul is going to react. If a person can say something and I automatically react in a certain way, this is really a passion. This is not, I'm not in control anymore. The passion is in control. It's the wild horses who are driving the wagon. So what we are talking about is learning to find out what those triggers are, the things that we react to that we don't really have much control over. At the moment when we react with anger, for instance, we are unable to love as God commands. And in a way, we are separated from God at that point. And before, we've talked about the fall of mankind. And with the fall, our soul has become darkened. Our soul has, has been broken. So the passions are these unnatural movements of the soul because the soul is broken. We might think of them as impulses, even like love. In a way, love is natural, but then it gets twisted into unnatural urges like lust. So even righteousness, doing the right thing, that's a good thing, but it gets twisted into an anger, into being ferocious when you see something doing the wrong thing or something that you disagree with. So there's a difference between wanting goodness and then being angry at someone, especially uh, for not doing the good thing. So there's the good thing, it gets twisted. And it might feel natural. It might, the passions, it's not like they feel unnatural. They feel natural. When you get angry at someone, it feels natural to be angry at them. When we have lust, it feels natural to have those feelings. But it's really only natural because our souls are broken. It's not natural because it's really natural. It's only it's the result of a broken soul. It's like a person who limps because they broke their hip in childhood, and for the rest of their life they're limping. They may think that the limp is natural because they've gotten used to it, but really it's not natural. It's just the result of the broken hip in childhood. And so also with our passions, they may feel kind of natural, but they're not natural. They're only feeling natural because we've gotten used to it and we don't really even see another way around it. It's really a delusion. A drug may seem natural to an addict, and actually if they don't have the drug, it might feel unnatural. They may feel bad, but the drug itself is actually dangerously unnatural. So the passions are like wild horses, wild animals in the soul. In the heart, anger roars. God created us to rule over the animals. If we read in the book of Genesis, it talks about human beings naming the animals. God is telling human beings to rule the animals, but now we don't live in harmony with the animals as it was meant. We can't even live in peace with the animals, with the wild horses within us. We're not taming the world and we're not taming ourselves. So this is a problem. I once, someone came up to me and told me about certain sins that they have, and they said, but Father, this is very natural. We're all animal creatures. We're all animals, and we are all, these are natural things that we do. Why is it a sin? And while animals may do certain things, as human beings and as Christian human beings, we believe that we're not called to be like animals, but called to be like God. We have a calling to grow in the likeness of God, to become more and more like God. So if we're going to be more and more like God, we can't just follow animal instincts, animal anger, animal lust, animal gluttony. We have to desire to follow Christ. which is not following or reacting to just any likes and dislikes in our life. So, in our efforts to tame the passions, we need to become observant of all our likes and dislikes, and we should learn to recognize by observation the passions that they trigger. This means being able to appropriately say yes and to say no as a rational choice, not based on an automatic response. The answer is not necessarily abstinence. We want to go beyond relying on abstinence, but sometimes abstinence may be necessary as a start to break a pattern that controls us. Sometimes we just need to avoid certain situations that trigger the passions. Now, it would be nice to say if a certain person, when we are with this certain person, it triggers certain passions within us. Maybe it triggers anger. Maybe it triggers gossiping. Maybe it triggers lust when we are with this person. And it would be nice to say, that's wrong. I should be able to be with this person and not have all those things triggered. And that's true. It would be the best thing to be able to do that. But sometimes step one is to avoid the things that trigger us. And it may be for a time that we have to avoid certain people or certain places or certain movies or certain things that we watch on TV. Sometimes avoidance or abstinence is helpful as we begin to tame the passions. We want to be able to intervene, though, in the thought process when the desires arise. We talked about this before a little bit when we were talking about watchfulness. So we need to be observant. We need to recognize when a desire, an unhealthy desire is rising up in us, usually because of something we like or don't like. And then, so we have to be observant or watchful. Because if we're not watchful, if we're not observant, these things will just happen and we'll react and we don't even think about it. Actually, there's some groups that talk about this too, and they might talk about it by using the word mindfulness, which is similar to watchfulness here. We need to be watchful and to be observing ourselves, noticing what is triggering the passions. If you get angry about something, think about what you were feeling just before you got angry. What was it that got you angry? Was it what this person said? Was it just seeing this person's face? Did that remind you of another incident at another time? So we need to be observant. And watchfulness and the practice of the Jesus prayer are very important. Instead of just automatically following things, we are watchful, we observe, and we can also use the Jesus prayer to kind of jump in and stop an automatic routine that our mind plays. So instead of reacting like a robot, we can condition our minds to call upon the Jesus prayer to interrupt and lift us out of the rut. And as we identify our main ruts, we pray for God's help. So we observe what that trigger is, and we ask for the Lord to help us. If we don't know what's triggering us, or we don't even think about it or watch for these things, then we really don't even know what to pray for a lot of times. When we maintain a regular prayer life, when we go to worship, when we receive the sacraments, these are ways we open up our hearts to God's grace helping us. Our passions, in a way, are kind of like a pet. If you've ever had a puppy, you remember how that puppy can take a shoe or other stuff and chew on it and tear it apart. And they growl when you try to take it from them. And this is normal behavior for a young pup. But if you have a puppy, you don't want the puppy to continue doing that as the puppy gets older. You expect maybe that the puppy is going to do that a little bit. But if we don't train the puppy in the beginning, it will stay wild and could even turn against us later on when it's older and when it's much stronger. Our passions are kind of like puppies. Unfortunately, many of us have grown up without properly training our passions. And then when we try to confront them when they're older, they're not very eager to cooperate. They rebel like angry pups that have grown up. Controlling them becomes a difficult task. But even if this is our situation now, and we have those kind of uncontrollable grown-up puppies inside of us, it's still essential to a virtuous life to still learn to tame those passions. When we first begin to tame the passions, we might experience inner irritation. I kind of do think of Great Lent. Sometimes I notice, even my own life, I can get irritated when Lent starts because maybe there's certain foods I'm not eating, or I try not to listen to entertainment during that time. I try to like really focus on not the things I want to do and like to do, but I really try to focus maybe even more so on what's good for me and what's best for me. And so, and sometimes you can experience a little inner irritation when you're not just following whatever you like. As you wrestle with them, you'll find that the block is actually in our mind. It's not that I'm not eating these foods and it's making me angry. It's the way I'm thinking about not eating these foods. And actually, the reason I'm not eating these foods is one of the reasons is to find out what's triggering me, and then to learn how to deal with the trigger. So as we mature in our prayer life, we find that we have more ways to overcome the ruts conditioned into our minds. And as we seek with God's help, we'll be aided in the struggle. Regular prayer, especially using the Jesus prayer, will be able to create a different kind of rut that's beneficial to the health of our soul. Patterns, better patterns that are stronger than the old ones. Eventually, the soul will regain its normal position of being in control, and the mind becomes a powerful and useful tool under the enlightened direction of the soul for living the life that God desires for us. So when we are engaged in taming the passions, it sometimes doesn't feel so good. It sometimes is irritating. And sometimes even Great Lent can be a little bit irritating. But we shouldn't think of Great Lent as, oh, I'm not supposed to eat these foods, or a Wednesday or Friday. I'm not supposed to do this because it's a fasting period. We should think of it as, I'm learning to tame my passions. If I need to be able to say no to things and not just have everything that I want anytime that I want it. If we can have anything we want anytime we want it and never learn how to say no, that's when we fall into uh, really harmful and bad practices. So, in terms of taming the passions, I think it's helpful if we do two things: practice virtues and have also ascetic practices too. So let's just, starting on practicing the virtues, the first one I would mention is moderation. Moderation is a virtue. Moderation and self-restraint, especially in regards to eating and drinking. This isn't now fasting I'm talking about. This is just in general. We should struggle personally with watching, being moderate in the things that we really like to do, especially eating and drinking. In terms of chastity, chastity is another virtue. Refraining from sexual relations with people outside of our marital relationship. So this is kind of an obvious virtue that we should be having as Christians. Another virtue is generosity. Freely giving of one's resources in time and attention. It's not just about money, but also time and attention beyond what is strictly necessary. Being generous. It might be being generous with our money, but being generous with our time, being generous with our attention. Mildness. This is a virtue. Having a gentle disposition and not being easily provoked. This is easier for some people and harder for some people. But we don't want to be easily provoked, get angry so quickly that it hardly takes anything and then we snap. Gentle disposition, being mild. Contentedness, another virtue. Feeling satisfied and content with what one has in our life and what we've been given. Learning to be content with what we have. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have a desire to grow in one's career or something like that, but with what we have at the moment we have it, to be content with that. Diligence, being persistent and careful in one's activities. And also the virtue of humility, having a modest view of your own importance, not thinking that if you're not here, that's going to be the end of the world. I think of all the saints, so many wonderful, beautiful saints that have had many spiritual sons and daughters, and they've all died at some point, and the world has continued, and there are still more saints that came after them, and there's still people that don't want to be saints and have no interest in that. But we need to not believe that everything depends on us and that we are the most important, that we are the center of everything. So that is in terms of practicing virtues. So those are all important, all those various virtues: moderation, chastity, generosity, mildness, contentedness, diligence, humility. But also there's some ascetic practices that we do that also help us in taming the passions. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. In addition to practicing virtues, ascetic practices such as prayer, spending time with God on a daily basis. And when we talk about prayer, spend some time in the Jesus prayer. The Jesus prayer is a wonderful practice that we can do that helps us in our learning to tame the passions. We talked about watchfulness, being observant. Watch your likes and dislikes and what they trigger in you, how they trigger you, the automatic responses that we have sometimes to to our likes and dislikes. We have fasting in the church. Fasting is an important practice. It's an ascetic discipline, an ascetic practice. And now everybody may not be able to fast in the same ways. Sometimes we have health concerns. Sometimes because we're very young or as we get older, our eating and food practices might be different. But we should remember that fasting is an important part of the ascetic practices um, throughout our life, especially as once we have left childhood. It should be even into our old age. We might not have the same type of fasting that we did when we were younger, but we should still have some practice of fasting, remembering that we have 4 fasting seasons during the year. We have certain fasting days, like most Wednesdays and Fridays, and a few other days that we celebrate during the year. We have the fasting before communion, that we don't eat in the morning before we receive communion on Sunday morning. So these are part of the ascetic practices that we have to help us tame the passions. Reading scripture and the church fathers, having a daily set plan. So it's important to read the scriptures and having a set plan with our prayer too. These can be very helpful. And one of the things I'm doing, and I know a lot of people have found it helpful, is having the daily Orthodox scriptures, that I've been reading the Bible every day. And it's a podcast that it's been helping people just as a way of kind of continuing their being involved, being immersed in the scriptures every day. So that might be something that you find helpful. Our worship, our coming to church, our coming to the services, lighting the candles, listening to the hymns, smelling the incense. This is all part of the ascetic practices that help us. Receiving communion, going to confession, being anointed with unction. These are all meant to help us. So when we go to communion, when we go to confession, when we are anointed with unction on Holy Wednesday or at another time of the year, if the church has an unction service, don't just get in line and receive communion or get anointed and then just get your bread and walk off. It's good to be asking the Lord for healing at those times, where the whole purpose of all these things is to help heal our soul, tame those passions. Almsgiving, doing things for the needy, helping the needy. It may be in terms of money, it may be in terms of other ways of caring and time and paying attention. This is all really important and part of our ascetic practices. The church also encourages making prostrations and making the sign of the cross. So these are also ascetic practices. Prostrations tend to be probably when we're in church or in our private prayer time. We're not going to be doing prostrations at work, but just when we do these things, it's good to be not just automatic about it, but think about how this brings you closer to God. We need to be observant. Some people, if they say a swear or something like that, they'll make the sign of the cross just as a way to help them to become more observant of the things they're doing and not just say things or do things without even thinking about it.